government comes from selling oil and coal, exporting it. And it's 50% of exports, so it stabilizes the currency. So if that collapses in a decade, that presents a huge stability and humanitarian challenge for a country like Colombia, but there are other countries that are even more dependent. Nigeria, Iraq, Timor-Leste, Ecuador, Bolivia, I think we can all name many where that's the case. So we also think that the international system needs to respond to have transition plans so that countries that are currently dependent on the fossil fuels can plan for their exit to ensure justice for everybody. These are things that no one country can do itself, and so the international system has to respond. So that's why there is the Fossil Fuel Treaty campaign. The strategy of the campaign is to push for the idea of addressing fossil fuels at all levels of government so that we begin to change the norms, what's normal and what's considered climate action as quickly as we can. So that's why we've started by focusing on cities, on like municipal, local governments, getting them to endorse the idea, and then to look at how could their city play a role in stopping the proliferation of fossil fuels. And we've seen, I think it's now at 53 or something, cities and municipal governments across the world have endorsed this idea, including Bonn, right here, the home of the UN Convention on Climate Change, which is very inspiring, but also Los Angeles, which is home to a lot of production of fossil fuels. And the local activists there have worked so hard to push that government to stop the expansion of fossil fuel extraction there and plan for the phase out. They really are leaders on that. And there are several other cities across the world. And I would note in Costa Rica, there was recently an election campaign where some questions were raised about whether they would start extracting oil and gas. And there are 7 municipal governments in Costa Rica who have said, well, it won't happen on our land. We're going to be a fossil-free non-proliferation zone. So the strategy has been to push to get cities to call for it, and then in the UN process to try and get governments in the UN to, as we would say it, say the F word, just to say fossil fuels. It has been so hard, and so many of us were campaigning around the COP that happened in Glasgow, the COP26, to try and get it to address fossil fuels, to get fossil fuels mentioned on the floor, to get governments to talk about their fossil fuel plans in their national plans. And there was, for the first time, some draft language around fossil fuels. Unfortunately, it was watered down, so it stopped mentioning all fossil fuels and just mentioned unabated coal power, which is a very specific kind of loophole, right? Because unabated suggests that you can abate coal power, which suggests you can use carbon capture and storage, which is like one of these techno fantasies that they try and sell to keep the industry alive. And it's only coal power. It didn't talk about oil or gas, which we assume is because the United States plans the biggest expansion of oil and gas in the coming years. So they didn't want to mention oil and gas, just talk about coal, which is an India and a China problem in their minds. So we had this problem. So in the Fossil Fuel Treaty Network, we saw that this week in June, there would be a conference called the Stockholm Plus 50 Conference, which is an official UN conference. It was to reflect on the last 50 years of international environmental governance and to set a plan with recommendations for action for the coming 10 years, out to 2030. And so we worked with partners across the world in different sectors. We have indigenous nations who are members, trade unions, doctors and medical associations, the parents, of course, young people in the Global Youth Task Force, debt and justice campaigners in the development sector, to push into that Stockholm process to raise up the issue of fossil fuels, to say, if this is the decade for action, if this is the decade to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and our international environmental agreements, we have to talk about coal, oil and gas. Coal, oil and gas are the biggest driver of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Their extraction drives the extinction crisis through climate impacts, but also just where it's being extracted and transported, when there are spills and when there's leakage and when there's burn-offs and all of this. And they also drive the pollution crisis with air pollution, killing millions of people every year from the burning of fossil fuels. And they're also a source, of course, for plastics and the plastics crisis. So we said, if you're going to have a serious conference about the Sustainable Development Challenge, you have to talk about fossil fuels. You have to mention coal, oil, and gas. So we worked with civil society partners in government, made submissions, made speeches, wrote articles, held forums, all of the things that we do every day, to move the conversation forward. And the results, I think, on Friday were certainly not as much as we need and not as much as we would want, but they are a first step. So for the first time, the UN conference has said we need to phase out fossil fuels. Yay! So we now have the Stockholm Plus 15 recommendation for action that we can draw on to say to governments, look, here's a recommendation, now we need to start working on it. So our hope is that now that we have this recommendation, there will be a series of governments who will take it up and take it more seriously. We've started to see, at the conference, I don't know if Sandra's told you, but Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Finland, Sweden and France all were very clear in their interventions saying we need to do something about fossil fuels. So I think that there's hope that some of those countries might want to take up this recommendation and see, okay, how could we take it forward? There's also, living in Colombia right now, there's an election happening in 2 weeks' time, and the leading candidate has in his platform he says there are two guiding issues for his government. One will be gender justice and one will be climate justice. And he says Colombia as an oil and coal producer needs to stop. It needs to have a plan to stop the production of oil and coal in the next 15 years. And he wants to work with the international community to do that. So we have a champion also for this idea in Colombia, and we're very hopeful that those elections will be successul. And so we hope that with this recommendation we'll begin to build even more international cooperation on it. So what we need is we need more people speaking out about why addressing fossil fuels directly is important. We need people to do that in whatever setting it might be. We want more cities and municipal governments to take up the idea to build the network. We want national parliamentarians, if they can't get their whole party to agree, if they can't get the whole government to agree, it's still powerful that they say, I support the idea that we need global action on fossil fuels. And there's already a list of 300 such members of parliament from I think 30 countries, maybe more countries. It was a letter, it must be more, must be 60 or so. There was a letter that was started by 20 members of parliament, all from the global south, so from the Pacific, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, to say, hey, this is not an idea that's coming from being told what to do by Europe, this is our idea about the vision of the alternative for production of our economy that we want to see, and we need global solidarity and cooperation to do it. So you can encourage your members of parliament to sign up to that declaration, and you can have a meeting with your local member of parliament or your minister. We have a lot of materials to support you to do that, to push the idea forward. So that's the fossil fuel treaty campaign. We hope that we will get a treaty that, one, sets the norm, that says there can be no new fossil fuel projects. It's simple, no new. Just stop expanding the problem. We have to agree, no new. Everyone agree, no new. Two, all right, no new. Now we need to work out how we phase down. Let's come up with international solidarity, high transfers, support, technical assistance to make phasing out possible and fair. And three, let's talk about global just transition. Because just transition has lots of elements when we think about getting off the fossil fuel system. It's important that the most impacted people in the sectors that are working there are involved in social dialogue with their unions. But it's also more than that. It's also the broader economic diversification question. How do we diversify the entire economy away from its reliance on fossil fuels in a fair way? And how do we actually ensure energy access? You know, people say, oh, we need the fossil fuels, we need them because there are so many people who need energy. There are 773 million people alive today who have zero electricity. Zero. And there are 1.4 billion more who have barely any electricity. So this is more than 2 billion people, right, in severe energy poverty in our world. Fossil fuels have been around for 200 years. If fossil fuels were going to bring energy to everybody, they would have it. The fossil fuel system is not designed to bring energy to people. It's designed to bring profits to a few. And that's why we need to be out there advancing our vision of people-controlled, renewable, sustainable energy. And we hope that the treaty idea will help do that as well. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Woohoo! We have here some people supporting the campaign of Bonn becoming the first city to endorse the treaty. We also asked ourselves, what does it mean now locally? But we have here people that are also campaigning on a global level, and I would like to open the question to anyone. Alex is here only for a few days, but they also feel like the Parents for Future campaign, and Miguel, maybe you can get some of these.
Which ones? The green ones?
No. The
postcard.
No, the postcards, because the Parents for Future, they really call for right now to embrace this campaign, and how can we as a grassroots network help you? Because there are people here in this meeting tonight, but also they're embedded here in Bonn, of course, and supporting this initiative, but they're also connected to being from various states in Uganda and so forth. How can we push this agenda on a local level, but also on a global level?
Yeah, I mean, I think having had Bonn endorsed is a great first step as a city council. I think there's some work to do to see that they implement here types of actions that would demonstrate a commitment to non-proliferation of fossil fuels. So are they, restricting any extraction of fossil fuels in the area? Are they limiting transport of fossil fuels through the area? Are they reducing the possibilities for supply of fossil fuels for transport and other things and replacing with electrification? Are they demonstrating some sort of solidarity? Does Bonn have a sister city in another country that they could support or catalyze to engage in a discussion about just transition? There would be some of the things, and banning advertising and removing fossil fuels from public spaces is another action that could be taken. So that would be one. If you don't live in the Bonn Municipal Council, perhaps your council could also take up the question. But then, as I said, raise this question with your members of Parliament, the federal Parliament, and see if they will take it up as an issue for Germany to advance on the global stage. I think with the war, Germany's realized that fossil fuels are a driver of conflict. They're a driver of dependence on regimes that they don't actually want to be dependent on. and that we need to have a way of planning the phase out of fossil fuels. So there's a real interest, I think, in Germany, and now's the time to have that conversation, because the risk is, the response from people has been, oh well, we need more gas infrastructure as response to the war, but the timelines that we have around building infrastructure means that's not going to reduce any of the current pressures. All it's going to do is lock us into building infrastructure that either will become stranded and the people will bear the costs of having subsidized it and so on, or it won't be stranded, and worse, it will cause debilitating climate change. So, we really have to try and see this off at the pass, and having a comprehensive proposal that they can be a part of, I think, can help shift that conversation.
Okay.
Hold on. Sandra, just to interrupt you, it's just a technical check, sorry.
Yeah.
Welcome for the house, that we have 43 minutes left, and usually we always have a short break for people to also relieve themselves, pour drinks, eat food, and then continue the discussion, of course. It's usually like a short 3 to 5 minute break, and I would really suggest that after you're done drinking with your glass, please wash it in the kitchen, wash it yourself. We don't have me. And you can still always continue the discussion. It's just a quick check.
Thanks. And I think the connections, what you raised between the Ukraine war, because it's very imminent, because here in the Tannenbusch house, there's also people, living here right now, they're refugees.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Should we take a
do a
break?
break.